You're listening to Security Pro Insights. Until recently, cybersecurity teams and physical security teams were happy letting each other work in their appropriate setting. With the many high-exposure cybercrimes threatening and impacting organizations around the globe, executive leaders are now asking to have cyber and physical security teams act as one. Today's guest, Hector Sanchez, provides solid insight on how we can be prepared as these two departments converge within our organizations. Hector, thank you for joining us today. Would you start by telling the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Hector Sanchez. I started my career back in the mid 80s in the U.S. Army. I served in the military for a little bit over 10 years. I was in the telecommunications area, satellite and microwave systems with special operations, NATO units, and conventional units in the United States and Europe and Asia. From there, as everyone who has spent some time in the military, know that you cannot do your job unless you secure a perimeter. So that was my initial days when it comes to physical and personal security, property security, perimeter security, and the different layers of security. Perhaps back then the language was different because we used to call it site, then we call it the perimeter, then we call it the environment. But today it's called layers of control. From there, I transitioned after almost 11 years in the military, working with Fortune 500 companies like AT&T, Lucent Technologies, and all the Alcatel Lucent and Nokia at the end, and in between some private organizations based overseas like Insat Fiber Networks and an independent like the Florida Lottery. That was 100% on the security of the locations, the information protection of assets, also the telecommunications connectivity, and in some instances the encryption of such and best practices. As I moved on in my career and reached levels of a senior director with Alcatel-Lucent and Nokia up until my departure, I started working on the compliance side, the enforcement of policies, developing the development of policies and procedures, and enablement of the business from the security standpoint. Since when we first put the organization together, the security area was being perceived more like an internal affairs restricting the business. But we changed that demeanor, that mentality when we embedded ourselves in a different project management cycles throughout the company in the different areas, working with cross-functional areas like the human resources department, legal, operations, the field, the contractors, partnering with the local enforcement entities where we have presence overseas and in the United States, also working internationally with the marketing department, trying to open business opportunity, partnering with the security professionals from our customers as well in order to prevent any incidents in preparation of any type of contingencies that could take us in the wrong direction. And that's a quick summary of pretty much where we are today.
Hector, when I came to know you, it was through LinkedIn connections. And you mentioned in your LinkedIn profile your experience in the cybersecurity space. And everything I heard in the intro really relates back to what I would call a physical security specialist. How have you began or what has driven your move to the cyberspace and becoming a knowledgeable expert in this particular area?
I don't label myself to be an expert, and this is the reason why. Security is evolving so rapidly and even more rapidly like any other industry, technology or the medical industry. But from the security standpoint, what have pushed that evolution has been the different incidents or identification of threats or because of incidents that has taken place. And the predominant factor that I have identified so far is on the cyber, the penetration of networks from external threats or unknown threats with either for diversion or entertainment or malice. They have caused damage some of the networks, either intellectually or physically. Prime example, a couple of years ago, there was a major incident in the Department of Veterans Administration network. We all know about the Sony incident when with hacking. Most recently, the allegations of other governments influencing or being involved in the politics or the elections here in the United States. Now, perhaps a lot of people will say, well, that's not security. It is, because when you start overlaying what are all the elements when it comes from the physical and the cyber, all of which you should start with an assessment. What is it that we have? What is it that we need? What is expected from the industry standpoint? And how can we close those gaps that have been identified? There's nothing more than an assessment that you have to do both at the physical and also at the cyber and information security. Both going to involve the human resource element that brings tremendous value to the management, to the oversight, to the evolution, and definitely the needs as we move forward. With that, you're also going to identify the needs of policies and procedures that act as a guidelines and the boundaries of operation throughout both sectors. Take, for example, at a physical level, you go into a facility, a building. You have to go and enter the location of the premises that belongs to that building. That includes from the main street into the parking lot, through the walkway, into a door, into a lobby, into a reception, into someone's office. Well, take it from the network standpoint. You got to come from the internet to a main website to a network. You're going to be authenticated. You're also going to have access into a particular, let's assuming, take the assumption of the application for an opportunity within a company. You're going to be given access to information that have been posted internally by the human resources department externally so you can see what is needed. Now that will open a portal into for you to apply. You are already within the perimeters of the boundaries of the company because you are filling out an application. No, you are not doing it with a pen or a pencil, but you're definitely doing in the cyber in a non-tangible format. But you are already in the network of the company. That information, or it could be a third-party provider that supports that aspect of the company. Go back to the lobby where you were introducing yourself to the front desk attendant. It could be a security guard. It could be an attendant who's going to ask you, why are you here for? Who are you here to see? And what is the purpose? It is no different than being authenticated and for you to point the credentials. One is logical. The other one is physical. Go from there into the cost of both in there. The cost of security because of the need, because of the evolution, because of the transitioning of the different businesses, call it social media, call it global marketing, call it anything else or any other label, definitely has incurred, has increased in such a way that we could put it into the triple digits nowadays. Now, with that cost, now reverse the equation. What is the return on investment that you are getting? If, just to give you a rough estimate, to have a 24/7, 365 operation of physical security guards, of personnel, including a supervisor at a facility, costs annually, whether it's internally or externally, you're talking close to $1 million a year. And that could be 7 to 10 people, no more than that. And I'm lowballing on that. I don't want to go too high. Now, say for instance, this is a campus that you got to have roving patrols, that you need to have security guards, you need to have tools like a vehicle, you need to have radios, so on and so forth. Whether it's internal or outsourced, it makes a difference in the financials of the company. But you need to see what the value is, what are the prevention that you are putting in place in order to create that protection that you expect to get, that return on investment. On the cybersecurity, then it comes, what are the controls? What is the restriction that you have within your network in terms of department? There have been some instances in my past, I don't want to mention any company in particular, where we have found intellectual property, documentation that belong to specific technologies or specific services or specific products from the marketing standpoint that includes description, that includes cost. They have been posted in the web, out open, Google it, you'll find it. Unfortunately, that information has been placed by disgruntled employees or other governments that were competing or are making a tremendous effort to steal information in order to get ahead of the competitive business of the telecommunications industry. Now, somehow, some way, that information left the premises of the network within the company, which is no different. There's an individual coming to a building and steal a computer, a laptop, a frame, a picture, or what have you. So those just a few of the different elements that we'll consider, both of which would take you into what is the physical today, or what I consider. For me, the physical and the logical started overlapping. I would say in the last 2 to 3 years, more rapidly than 10 years ago.
So,
You always have the security. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
so if I hear you right, one of the things you're saying is you just started seeing a convergence of these 2 or 3 years ago. It's the threat, although different, is very similar from impacting into the perimeter. There is a cost scenario, so we all know about shrink. We all know about the threats of a campus environment and what that legal risk can be to us if there's a breach. And then now what you're saying is there's the intellectual data. We talk about efficiencies with guards, so we're putting Internet of Things devices, for example, would be our IP cameras that we're placing up there. All of this creating vulnerabilities, yet making us better. And you just saw all this stuff starting to collide. Is that what drove you to say, okay, maybe I'm not an expert yet, but I better get there soon?
I could say that is one of the reasons. The one transition that I have seen, just to give you a quick example here, look at the first generation of cell phones. The first generation of cell phones, I want to say 20, 30 years ago, they were out in the market. The only thing you could do is talk. I mean, you're talking about a brick device that weighed at least almost 10 pounds, and you have to walk around and charge it. It was like carrying around a car battery, but the only thing you could do is talk. Second generation, by then they got smaller. Third generation, but definitely a two and a half generation, you will be able to text and something smaller. So the beepers start fading away. So you have more capability in one single device with two purposes or two functions. Now, when we're talking about the towards the end of third, fourth generation, now you're talking about video, the capability to be able to take pictures or video, and then you'll be able to surf the web, so on and so forth. When it came to security, in its beginning stages, security was defined as the muscle of the company. They want to prevent the barrier between a threat or a risk into the unknown vulnerability of the operation. Nowadays, you have social media. You have the threat of organizations trying to reduce operational costs by allowing individuals to use their own devices. Internet of Things is one of them. You bring your own device, a BYOD, bring your own device, personal computer into the network. The company no longer has to invest in technology, in a device to assign to an individual, but they do have to give you access into the network. The practices of that individual, whether it could be somebody who's very knowledgeable in a particular department within the company, but not in the best practices of securing the data, securing the information, what is allowed and is not allowed to be copied, to be emailed, to be modified. And even within those parameters of modification, copying, or transmission, there's no control. A lot of entities do not have a control that would tell them, Hector Sanchez have his own computer. He's working today out of a PC, but tomorrow he's working out of his iPad, downloaded a document which he modified from the cloud, and he sent it to an IP address X, Y, and Z. And it was a restricted information, it was proprietary information, it was intellectual information. So yes, you recognize you authenticated my access into the network, but never the control beyond that. So I access the premises of the parking lot, the building. Now I'm in the office, definitely have access, but I'm in there by myself, taking as much as I can and interest I have. The Internet of Things, with the same device that I'm now operating into a network from my premises in my residence, I also have my personal network within my house, where I have my refrigerator, where I have my sprinkler system, where I have my smart TVs connected, and I'm able to serve everything and anything that I desire, as with my family. I happen to leave that portal open. If by any chance I get hacked in my residence, there's also a gateway open into the company, into the premises. And organizations do not have strong policies or are not enforcing strong policies until after incidents start taking place. That's what drove me into perhaps I need to look at this from the physical strength versus the need that is coming. The trend is changing, but the threat continues to evolve more from the physical to the logical. No longer you have to steal a computer. A couple of years ago, when I was responsible of the Latin American network, there were individuals from this particular country that were targeting, and this is with the cooperation of the local federal police of this country, uh, devices were being stolen. What got our attention was that they were targeting individuals from the sales, marketing, and sales support engineers because of the intellectual property that involves particular technology. The computers were being identified the following day, but no hard drive was ever found in any of them. Individuals that we ran into later on have told us that they came from that company, told us that they remember seeing documents that involve pricing, that involve strategy, that involve approach within the competitive edge that the company had, and that was being presented by this individuals or this particular overseas company. Now, the threat was always there. The proaction did not become a priority until it was an incident, and then it became reaction. The lack of policies, the lack of control. Security was always in the physical personnel, protect the executive, protect the premises, make sure nobody breaks in. Rarely we had any break in through a window, through a door, through anything. But there were hundreds of thousands of attempts of advanced persistent threats, APTs, into a network. And the value that was lost by the company was because of lack of the understanding from those in charge of those areas or even from the culture within the company as a whole.
You know, Hector, you've just done an amazing job of really outlining the reasons why one needs to be constantly growing in their personal development and looking at the change because our environment has changed quickly. You mentioned a beeper earlier, and I just kind of had a little chuckle to myself when I started in this industry 20 years ago. Yes, I was handed a pager. That's the way I was able to be contacted quickly. And I remember the cell phone battery, and I remember all of this stuff, but it seems so long ago, but yet it's just changing quickly. And I talk to a lot of people in the security space, and I do believe that there is a common thing we agree on, and that is that physical and cyber or IT security are converging. I spoke with a gentleman yesterday who predicts that in 5 years, and he believes he's being, conservative by saying 5 years, that every major organization across the U.S. will merge their physical and IT security teams together. Now, who will manage that, I guess, remains to be seen, but that there is a belief that they will no longer keep two separate teams to be responsible for security. It will be one team responsible for both because they both go hand in hand. Now, I say all that because what I want to dive into with you is we know this is a reality. You have set it up for us in a fantastic way. But if I'm a physical security manager, and I talk to a lot of them, we're a little intimidated by this whole conversation of cyber. We're not network professionals. So this convergence is a little scary. It's a little intimidating. So what I'm wondering is, can you dive into just some of the similarities? Make this a little less intimidating for me. Why is physical and cyber similar?
You know, Scott. First of all, I agree with the gentleman with gentleman's assessment. I think he was being first the assessment and second the timeline that he put 5 years in was being extremely conservative. I think those 5 years already started counting 3 years ago. So, and I say this because of the proactiveness that have been taken by entities as a result of reactive uh, activities as a cause of an incident. When you're talking about what overlays between the two, I started mentioning a few. Number one, the assessment. Number two, the human resources. You always going to need people. Now, the capabilities of a technology is only as good as the individual or the organization who drives it. When I started my career almost 30 years ago, the word security was solely utilized when it came to personnel, to physical asset, or a premise. It was never about network. The word that we were taught, the word that we utilized, or the action that we took to protect anything beyond the physical was encryption. Once we set up the telecommunication connectivity on the satellite link or the microwave link or what have you in the military, then before you can even say hello over the phone, you had to encrypt, but you needed that physical connection between the devices through a logical interface. Once you had that, then you encrypt. And from there, you start extending from your switches to your telephone, so on and so forth. Fast forward 10 years, then you end up with an array of phrases that was the IT, information technology, information system, telecommunications, and then security. You're talking about four areas within the entity. When you mentioned that they both will be converging to one, I think those that haven't done it are behind. Unfortunately, I have to take that approach because of the incidents and current threats. Now, this is not only a threat that is being faced by governments or Fortune 500 companies. Take the small and medium-sized businesses that rarely any of them have any type of policy and procedure in place to protect credit card transactions, or the fact that they utilize computers to send wire transfers into the bank. So the practice covers everything from the physical to the logical. Move on from the human resources, the definition of the description of the policies and procedures, emergency contingencies that need to be in place in case something happens, business continuity. We're not talking at a physical level. Unfortunately, by any business, any entity within any industry, the law requires that they need to have an operational liability insurance in place. It's mandated. If you have a location, you need the liability insurance of X millions of dollars amount. It doesn't matter. You also need insurance at a physical level. If your premises get destroyed by a hurricane, tornado, natural, or man-made disaster, it will be covered. It wasn't until recently that the government started enforcing, and this came as a result primarily on the medical field with the protection of patient information and HIPAA, that they started enforcing you now need to have coverage within your operational liability insurance in the protection of an incident involving cybersecurity or information security, because that was also a vulnerability. Backtrack 20, 30 years ago, that was not in place, wasn't even mandated, or it was in place, but it was never enforced. Now, the cost of 324/7 365 is outrageous when you're looking at personnel versus outsourcing. And I don't want to get too, into the details regarding of the both of them, but it's something that the employer is going to look, where am I getting for that? Because now 25 or 30% of my revenue that I bring every year is going to go towards operational liability or physical liability or logical liability and taxes and so on and so forth. Then you're taking away from my bottom line. So the business has taken, they scraping the surface with a bare minimum to operate. And it's not until they have an incident that they decide to react towards the protection.
Now, Hector, one of the things that I learned the other day, I went to a cybersecurity conference and I walked away really with a much stronger understanding of how similar cyber and physical security can be. And trying to keep it as simple as possible, I realized that it's the same job of protecting the environment, usually starting at a perimeter, as you said, detecting a breach, and if there is the detection of a breach, responding according to the policies that had been set in place. And then after all is done, you correct anything that needs corrected and you start again, protect, detect, respond. And I realized in that particular setting that the concept of security is the same. It's just our protection and what we're protecting is different. So physical has always been about the physical asset, the fence, the building, the items within the building. And now we've just moved it on the cyber side to a virtual world, but it's just as real. And now our protection is information. Our protection is the knowledge that sits upon that network. Would you agree with that analysis?
I agree with you 100%. As you said, I mean, it went from the physical barrier, where it was either structural or natural. I mean, you had a fence, or you had a wall, or you had a building, or you have bushes, or you have a tree line, or you had a creek at the physical level. On the other side, you had passwords, you have different layers of control, you had notifications in a non-tangible world. So definitely, there's a 100% similarity between the two. And I'm going to go a little bit beyond the subject and go back into the previous question. Security professionals had always had that perception and only value for what they knew at the physical. What it was known as the muscle of the building was always the security individuals in the front door. Nowadays, that intimidation that you mentioned earlier comes more from the lack of understanding by the security professionals that we're talking about. You need to know how to write code. You need to know how to write software. When in reality, it's nothing more than the practice and the involvement and the evolution of their own understanding so they can understand the threat. And when you look at the statistics of how many threats, how many incidents have taken place at a physical level, and just to name one that is well known, active shooter incidents, not one active shooter incident in the history since the FBI has been tracking, since I believe it's since 1996, had involved that the individual come and take hostage of a network, steal information, and then shoot people. It's all physical. It's all personnel. It's all in the premises.
Right.
Now, when you look at the same statistics by the FBI as to how many cyber threats, and I'm not going to go back as far as 2006, I'm going to go back in the last 3 years, it's 300% fold comparison on the cyber attacks in companies, regardless of the industry. This time it's no discrimination. It used to be hospital. It used to be government. Now it's irrelevant what it is. The ability to steal information because they have gone beyond the barrier, the structural and natural. Now it's cyber. For security professionals, whether it's because the company structure separating the IT areas versus the physical security area, are no longer doing the detection, the reaction, or the enforcement of the policies and procedures for unknown reasons. I don't want to say it's because of lack of understanding, because they are IT professionals. They understand the network. They know how to protect the network, but the policies and the practices are not equal as the contingencies that need to be in place in comparison to the risk and threat that we are now working and operating under at a global level.
What about training? As you talk about all these risks, we always looked at training our people to ensure that they do not let a guest in without some sort of identification that they actually work there, they're a contractor, they belong. We've always kind of fought and trained our people to ensure they're just using their heads and that they're actually a part of the security team while they're on that site. Yet in the cyberspace, training is just as important to our team, all the employees, that they have a level of responsibility in protecting all the information as well. Are the are there any major differences there, or from a training perspective of our internal people, is that similar also?
I think there's a similarity, and I think the first thing that needs to be put in place is from the management. They need to be the first ones to understand. We should not be waiting as professionals, or the management of any organization should not be waiting for an incident to take place before you can do this assessment. What is the assessment that is being done? How our physical security perimeter look like? And they're looking at the fence. How as the logical security, and then they look at the network. But when you look at the security professional themselves, what is the preparation and understanding that you have between the two worlds, as you mentioned before? Security was segregated by different areas, either IT or physical or information, and then reaction to whenever an incident, and then attempt to bring them together. When in reality, you are protecting the same asset within the value of the core values of the company. I think that the first thing definitely is understanding needs to be outlined in such a way that the physical, what are the comparisons between the two? They both require an assessment. They both require human resources. They both require policies, procedures, and protocols that need to be in place. They both involve a cost. So from the business operating standpoint, there's no difference between the two. We're not asking security professionals to learn code writing or COBOL or any type of specific language to understand information security protection. Give you an example. We had a premise in upstate, the one I mentioned in Northeast in the United States, where we had an average between, I would say, 2 to 300 visitors. This was a campus facility. They had approximately 6,000 employees and contractors assigned daily, and 2 to 300 visitors that would come into the premises. Also in university, the policy before I took over the organization was individuals come to visit whomever within the building, a 6-story building. You come to the front desk, you provide your identification. The security will tell you go to the third floor, make a left down the hall, look for room X, Y, and Z. In that path, definitely you will pass, I don't know, I would say at least 10 different printers. Individuals, because it was a centralized printer, no in one individual except human resources or legal were segregated. Everybody else within operation had a printer that had access in the hallway. So when a visitor will go by, documentation was being disappeared. Curiosity or malice of an individual will take that's information protection. But the individual is looking for that particular person that they can't see. So we reversed the policy. No individual external to the organization that has not been vetted by the security or human resources department was allowed into the premise. And because you're not an employee or a daily supporting contractor, you will have to register every day. Now the individual being visited will have to come to the lobby, escort that individual even when they went into the restroom or the facilities to avoid such practice. It was easier than having to move the printers or having to assign 5,000 printers throughout the facility. So the basic practices of an operating company, I mean, it's very little cost, if any, if you look into that. So just understanding at a physical level or the logical level, what are we protecting? What is it that we are preventing? What is the risk? What is the threat? Then we can identify what are the vulnerabilities, how can we fix it. When we're not talking about investing millions of dollars in the latest technology or even replacing. One of the newest trends that is being utilized in large campuses is the utilization of drones. But with that, there's also a cost behind it. You need an operator. You need an FAA licensed operator, no different than if you had a pilot to provide that service. And then the liability behind that if the drone gets, the network with the drone is being operated gets hacked or the drone lose connectivity and drop on somebody, those things are also considered. Take it on the opposite side, at a physical level, personnel. The misfortune of the incident at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando involved a well-known organization that employs close to 750,000 people around the world, including the federal government of the United States. This individual was one of the highest qualified within the best practices of the company at the psychological level, at the contingency level, at the policy level, but he was a security guard. Could that have prevented, could that have notified that whatever radical beliefs would have been identified prior for that incident to take place a year ago? We don't know that. But none of that was known until the incident took place. There was a reaction to it, to an action by an individual who had whatever beliefs against the company or against an entity. Take it at the company level. Those incidents that are taking place, when you look post-incident and investigation, which is one of the areas of responsibility of security, when you investigate what is the level, what took place, how could it have been prevented, is the lack of understanding, is the lack of training played a factor in it. And those are, I would say that's a big gap in the security professional standpoint, that we are dependent on our employers. If you're a security professional, you shouldn't wait for an incident to take place for you to react. You need to prepare and be able to read what's coming into the future. How are we evolving? So both from the physical and the tangible. Like I said earlier, I think that the 5-year timeline, three of those had already passed. So we're coming to the evolution.
I don't disagree, quite frankly. I just want to summarize real quick. I heard we talked about the similarities, and at the end of the day, I liked how you said it. We're not asking anyone to become programmers. We're not asking anyone to begin building the network infrastructure. What we're saying is policies and procedures are consistent across the board. Just look at the cyber side as you would from a security standpoint. are there things that someone could get their hands on? Are there is there property that in the wrong hands would be destructive to your organization? And when you start going through that whole process, it's the same whether it be physical or cyber. You're just having to look at it based on the environment you're working in. So, Hector, we've really set that forward today. You have done a great job of really providing some examples of how these two are converging and how they're similar. We're nearing kind of the end of our time. Can we finish with just maybe a few best practices? What are a couple things you might tell this physical security manager for this show that he or she can do to begin embracing this convergence a little more so they are ready when their organization makes them aware of it's time?
Uh, and as a quick note, I think the first step should be individuals that are members of an entity. They need to commence approaching in the conversation at a conversation level. What are the best practices? What are the current practices that, from the physical security standpoint, IT have in place? How can we help you protect your network? And vice versa. From the IT standpoint, I mean, rarely any companies nowadays have their servers exposed into the lobby area. None of them actually do. So at a physical level, they're protected, it's segregated. Take that outside the premises, take that inside the network. What are the best practices? Understand what is the infrastructure and the network. This is like you said earlier. This is not necessarily having to rewrite code or anything of that nature. Understand what the business is about and definitely approaching the conversation. Beyond that, start looking into organizations like the International Information System Security Certification Consortium, also known as ISC Square, and the American Society for Industrial Security, ASIS International. There's a ton of information that is free and available on their website as best practices. If I'm not promoting any of them, but if you have access as a member, you have even a wealth of information of checklists and outline and best practices as a result of those that have put in place proactive plans and even testimonies of those that have been involved in incidents after what are the findings. When you look at and prepare a comparison between companies and industry, you see a similarity. And that similarity comes back to the lack of understanding from the physical and logical security professionals that were responsible and that gap in between them on that segregation. And I think as professionals, we need to try to close our gaps in order to move on and try to secure a future the best we can. We need to stay ahead if we want to be successful.
So maybe the best practice for a security professional today is to not dig your head in the sand and hope that this is not happening, to acknowledge that it is happening, and to just begin educating yourself, to realize I hope this show, this particular episode, was just a way of saying, hey guys, it's not as scary as it looks. It's not as scary as it sounds. And then just begin finding information. You gave us a couple great resources. There are books galore out there in this world. Network, talk to peers, do what I did. Find yourself a cyber conference, a cybersecurity conference. Go there, and you're going to learn that we're all in this together. And so, what I heard from you is the best practice is acknowledge it's happening and just begin learning.
Correct. Without a doubt. And like you said, take that first step. Uh, Humans by nature do not get involved in what they don't know automatically or voluntarily. They wait until something happens. Uh, some even, when they're invited, don't do it. But I think you mentioned the key step, which is, get involved in those incidents. Pick up the book, pick up a magazine. There's a ton of them, and you'll find a lot of testimony, a lot of information. You are not going to be writing code by the end of the year. This is not what this is about. But it definitely will prepare from the understanding approach that there is a threat, that we have something in common. One is physical, the other one is logical. But the commonality, we both want to protect the asset that we belong to, which is the organization.
Absolutely. Hey, Hector, we have really run out of time, but I always like to give our guests an opportunity to reach out to those who have provided such insight to us like you have today. What is the best way someone could reach out to you if they would like to connect with you and learn a little more from you?
I'm going to give you 2 points of contact. One is definitely my LinkedIn profile. You can find me as Hector Sanchez. Definitely my personal email, which is sanhec68 at gmail.com. And that's S as in Sam, A as in Apple, N as in Nancy, H as in Hector, E as in Edward, C as in Charlie, 68 at gmail.com. And also my personal cell phone, which is 561-215-0742.
For all the listeners, I will have all of this in the show notes as well, so you don't need to be trying to write this down while you're driving in the car. With that being said, I will link everything in the show notes, and all I ask is that you would reference the show so that Hector knows where you have learned about him, and he will be able to open up his heart, his mind, and provide knowledge to you in that new relationship. The show name, if you're new to it, is Security Pro Insights. With that, Hector, I thank you for your time. I thank you for giving of yourself to us today. And we look forward to speaking with you potentially again in a little more detail on a future episode.
Thank you, Scott.